Long before the age of machines and steel, in a world ruled by kings with stone thrones and armies made of flesh and fear, there lived a boy without a name. He was born under a dying tree on the edge of a crumbling village, surrounded by whispers and storm clouds. His mother passed away during childbirth, and no one claimed to be his father. The villagers called him Nooker, which meant nothing in their tongue. But what they didn't know was that this nothingness held the power to outsmart empires. While other children played with wooden swords and chased goats through dust fields, Nooker sat alone, carving shapes into the dirt. He watched birds and how they migrated with perfect timing. He studied the stars and how they returned in predictable patterns. He noticed how one sick cow would infect the entire herd if it stood near the water source. He didn't speak much, but his mind worked like a quiet storm, always calculating, always observing. He built his first invention at the age of 7, a water trap that pulled clean water from morning dew using nothing but stone plates and woven leaves. The village elder called it witchcraft and destroyed it. But Nooker rebuilt it, better and faster. He hid his tools, learned to work in the dark, and never showed his full hand. By the time he turned 12, Nooker could predict when the river would flood just by watching the ant colonies move. He could trick crows into dropping nuts on rocks to break them. He started experimenting with pulleys, smoke signals, and sundials made of polished clay. He created a small underground room beneath a broken mill, where he kept scrolls he wrote himself, full of coded language, drawings of machines that didn't exist yet, and maps of nearby kingdoms. What the world saw was an orphan. What the world didn't see was a mastermind in the making. The 5 kingdoms around his village were constantly at war, over land, water, taxes, and pride. Each king claimed to be the chosen ruler of the land, but none of them saw the true danger rising from below. Nooker watched them fight and lose men for inches of dry soil. He thought it foolish. Why conquer through war when you could do it through weakness? His first test came when a caravan from the northern kingdom passed through the village. Among the merchants was a wounded spy, hiding in plain sight, carrying a scroll encrypted in an ancient script. Nooker, curious as always, snuck into the camp at night and stole the scroll. He decoded the message in 2 days. It revealed the northern king's plan to poison the wells of a rival kingdom to cause panic and disease. Instead of returning the scroll or telling the villagers, Nooker made a copy and sent it anonymously to both rival kingdoms. But he altered the message just slightly, just enough to frame each side as a traitor. Within a week, both kingdoms turned on each other, thinking the other had betrayed the alliance. No one ever traced it back to the orphan boy with sharp eyes. This was the moment Nooker realized power didn't lie in swords or bloodlines, it lay in information. Whoever controlled the truth could control the world. And he would make sure he was the only one holding the strings. Years passed. Nooker grew taller, his features sharper. At 18 he could pass for a servant, a soldier, or a merchant, depending on the disguise he wore. His eyes, however, never changed, always alert, always one step ahead. He trained his voice to mimic accents. He learned to move without sound, to read lips, and to pick locks made of bone and bronze. He began to travel between kingdoms under different names, sowing doubt, trading false information, and secretly funding revolts. He never stayed in one place for more than a month. In one village, he was known as a healer who made disease vanish by mixing herbs and steam. In another, he was the silent man who taught farmers how to triple their crop yield using reflective stones and underground channels. Everywhere he went, he left behind whispers, inventions, and questions. But no one ever remembered his face. One day, he stood on a cliff overlooking all 5 kingdoms. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the castles, towers, and cities below. 5 kings ruled the land, each thinking he was untouchable, each holding power through fear, gold, and blood. Nooker smiled. He had spent his life learning their weaknesses, the pride of the western king, the paranoia of the northern one, the greed in the east, the broken alliances in the south, and the hidden illness of the central ruler. All it would take was one push at the right time, and each throne would collapse like a game of stones. He didn't want their riches. He didn't want their crowns. He wanted control. Not as a tyrant, but as a ghost in the shadows, a king who ruled without being seen, who could rebuild the world with logic and innovation rather than violence. And so, he began to plan. Not for war, but for precision. Not for armies, but for moments. One move at a time, he would bring down 5 kings, each in their own way, each without spilling a drop of blood. And when the world looked for the conqueror, they would find only a name carved in silence. Nooker. The boy with no name. The boy who became the storm. The kingdom of Valdara stood tall in the west, with its grand palace carved into the mountainside like a crown on stone. Its ruler, King Duran, was known for his pride, more obsessed with being admired than actually ruling his people. The halls of his palace gleamed with polished marble, gold-lined mirrors, and tall windows that reflected his image wherever he walked. But in the corners of those same halls, shadows moved, and one of them belonged to Nooker. He arrived in Valdar under a different name, Kale, a wandering orphan looking for work. His clothes were torn, his sandals worn, and his face smudged with just enough dirt to blend in. No one suspected the quiet stable boy who fed the royal horses and swept hay off the floors. Nooker made sure of that. He kept his head low, ears open, and hands steady. The palace staff paid him no mind, just another invisible servant. But at night, Nooker became something else. He had memorized every corner of the palace within a week, counted every step between guard shifts, marked every loose stone in the servant tunnels, and discovered that beneath the king's court chamber lay an abandoned wine cellar, sealed off for decades. He claimed it as his lair. He brought in stolen parchment, charcoal, and pieces of clockwork he'd gathered from traders. Over time, he built a hidden workstation filled with levers, smoke tubes, and wire traps. He wasn't preparing for a battle. He was designing a performance, one that would make King Duran's own court destroy him. Nooker had identified the 3 most powerful figures in the king's court: Lord Ever, the finance minister with hidden debts; Lady Sarah, the queen's closest confidant, who once sold family secrets for favors; and General Tharn, the army's commander, who secretly hated the king's obsession with image over security. They didn't trust each other, but they all shared one thing in common: ambition. Using fake letters, overheard gossip, and perfectly timed incidents, Nooker began to feed their suspicion. A misplaced letter in Lady Sarah's chamber hinted that Lord Ever was planning to accuse her of treason. A locked box in the general's quarters mysteriously opened, revealing a forged map showing the king ordering troops to be pulled from the borders, leaving them vulnerable. And a merchant whispered to Ever that the queen was in love with Tharn. None of it was real. But it didn't need to be. Nooker had studied psychology. He knew that when fear and ambition mix, people don't wait for proof, they act. And act they did. It started with silent tension in the court meetings. Then came the secret confrontations. Finally, one morning, a servant found a golden goblet in the queen's chamber that had been laced with a poison used only by military officers. The court exploded. King Duran didn't understand what was happening. He screamed, threatened, and imprisoned people at random. But the seeds of distrust had already grown too deep. Within days, Lord Ever fled the palace, leaving behind an empty vault. General Tharn ordered the arrest of 2 royal guards, then vanished into the mountains with a small unit of loyal soldiers. Lady Sarah attempted to escape through the river tunnel but was caught and forced to confess, under a truth serum, that she believed the king himself had turned mad. The kingdom was crumbling from the inside. And while all this chaos unfolded, Nooker moved quietly through the tunnels, ensuring the right documents were found, the right letters burned, and the right whispers reached the ears of the right people. No one ever looked twice at the stable boy. When the king finally stood alone in his hall, no generals, no ministers, no wife, he ordered a day of silence. The palace gates were closed, and only his personal guards remained. But even they had started to question their loyalty. Food supplies ran low. Rumors of rebellion echoed from the city streets. Nobles from other regions refused to answer the king's summons. Nooker waited. And then, on a fog-filled morning, he released his final masterpiece. Using a hidden tunnel, he placed small devices under the marble floor of the court hall, crafted to release bursts of smoke with a foul odor when heated by slow-burning coal. When the king entered the chamber for his solitary audience, the floor hissed and released the smoke. As the guards panicked, Nooker's voice echoed through a hidden horn tunnel he'd carved weeks earlier. He disguised his tone to sound ancient, distorted, otherworldly. "You have ruled by mirrors, Duran. But now the truth has come to burn you." The smoke thickened. The king collapsed, coughing, believing he had been cursed. His guards, terrified of sorcery, fled the palace that night. When the city awoke the next day, it was to a silent palace and a missing king. Some said he went mad. Others said he fled the kingdom in shame. No one could explain what truly happened. But in the months that followed, Valdara found peace under a new form of council rule, one that quietly followed the suggestions of a mysterious advisor who sent scrolls with solutions for every problem. Efficient tax plans, crop growth strategies, water distribution models. The scrolls came from the shadows. From Nooker. He had brought down the first king. Without a sword. Without a war. And now, it was time to move east. There were 4 more thrones to topple. 4 more kingdoms bound by pride, fear, greed, and lies. And one ghost in the shadows who knew exactly how to break them. East of Valdara, across blistering dunes and serpent-filled rivers, lay the kingdom of Avonmore. Unlike the stone castles of the west, Avonmore shimmered with colorful silk canopies, mirrored halls, and temples carved from ivory-colored sandstone. The people lived under the rule of King Veyron, a ruler obsessed with omens, dreams, and prophecies. He wore golden robes embroidered with stars and claimed he was chosen by the skies themselves. But while his eyes searched the heavens, his feet ignored the rot growing beneath his throne. It was the perfect place for Nooker's next move. He entered Avonmore not as a servant or a spy, but as a seer. Wrapped in dusty robes, his eyes marked with charcoal rings, he called himself Ashar, the Vision Walker. The guards mocked him at first, but his words were different, measured, strange, and unsettling. He predicted a fire in the city market, which occurred 2 days later. He warned of a drought that followed precisely on his timeline. Every prophecy he spoke was not magic. It was science, disguise, and pure observation. The fire? He caused it by placing dry herbs and glass lenses near a bakery roof where the sun would ignite them at noon. The drought? He knew from studying wind currents, cloud absence, and dammed irrigation upstream. To the people of Avonmore, though, it looked like divine knowledge. Within a week, the priests invited him to the outer temple. By the second week, the king himself demanded an audience. King Veyron was surrounded by incense, flutes, and veiled dancers, his throne shaped like a crescent moon. "Speak, Vision Walker," he said. "What do the stars whisper about me?" Nooker bowed deeply, concealing his eyes. "Your time has not ended, my king, but it is clouded by betrayal from within." The king went silent. In a world where stars were more trusted than soldiers, Nooker knew the path to destroying Avonmore's ruler lay not in breaking the kingdom's strength, but in unraveling his belief. Nooker began crafting illusions. At night, using mirrors, glowing stones, and lantern smoke, he created celestial signs above the temples, patterns that mimicked ancient symbols from old myths. He scattered stones etched with strange runes across temple gardens. The priests believed the stars were aligning in rare patterns. The king grew nervous. Then came the scroll. One morning, a sealed scroll arrived on Veyron's throne, delivered anonymously, aged artificially with fire smoke, and stitched with silk thread. It was written in an old dialect few remembered, but Veyron's high priest translated it. The message was clear. The true king has been marked by the falling crown. He shall rise not from royalty, but from the ashes of wisdom. He walks among you. The king panicked. He called secret meetings with his advisors. The word usurper whispered its way through the palace. Veyron tightened control, banning public gatherings, punishing those who spoke of fate. But it only deepened the people's belief. Something was changing. Nooker quietly fanned the flames. He hired local scribes to copy symbols onto buildings, started rumors in the markets, and sent dreams to the king's council by slipping herbs into the temple incense. Herbs that caused vivid hallucinations. Night after night, they dreamed of fire, collapsing crowns, and a figure in shadows holding a sun-shaped key. The king became unstable. He dismissed priests, accusing them of plotting against him. He stopped eating food from the palace kitchen. He believed the stars were judging him. Then, Nooker revealed the final act. On the night of a rare lunar eclipse, Nooker stood atop the tallest temple, wrapped in white cloth. He released a glowing balloon made from silk, air, and heated coals, something no one in Avonmore had ever seen. It rose into the sky, floating past the moon, casting a moving shadow across the city. The people screamed. The sign. The falling crown. At that moment, Veyron collapsed in the throne room, shaking. He screamed that the prophecy had come, that the usurper was here. His guards, uncertain whether to believe him or arrest him, stood frozen. By morning, the king had vanished. Some said he escaped into the desert, wandering under the stars, trying to find the truth. Others believed he went mad and jumped into the river. His crown was found days later, placed silently at the temple steps, wrapped in a piece of white silk. The people never learned what truly happened. But after Veyron's disappearance, Avonmore became a kingdom ruled by council, guided by scrolls from an unseen advisor known only as Ashar. The kingdom prospered. Crops grew in the desert using underground channels. Trade routes expanded with wind-mapped sailing paths. Diseases disappeared after new health practices were quietly introduced to healers. It all came from one mind, hiding in plain sight. Nooker. He had removed the second king. No armies. No blood. Just a stage, a script, and a puppet who pulled his own strings. As Nooker left the city behind, he paused on a sand dune, looking back at the glowing lanterns of Avonmore. 2 kingdoms had fallen, each by a different method. Each tailored perfectly to its ruler's weakness, pride, and belief. Next, he would move north, to a kingdom ruled not by fear or faith, but by gold. And Nooker already had a plan to make wealth mean nothing. In the far north, nestled between ice-glazed mountains and deep sapphire lakes, stood the kingdom of Sarakar, a land of cold winds and colder hearts. Its ruler, King Halrix, was not driven by honor or belief. He ruled through wealth. Gold flowed through the veins of Sarakar's cities like blood. Massive vaults, glittering statues, and jeweled roads made up the royal capital. Halrix measured everything by value: land, soldiers, citizens, even loyalty. But when everything is for sale, the kingdom is already rotting. Nooker entered Sarakar not as a worker or prophet, but as a merchant. With furs stitched from different regions and a cart filled with intricate, mechanical trinkets, he called himself Valen, a trader from the Frost Plains. His gadgets fascinated the wealthy: small mechanical birds that flapped when warmed by light, puzzle cubes that unlocked secret compartments, and ornate devices that could tell time by candle flame. The nobles paid in silver. The palace guards bought in gold. And slowly, Nooker bought information. He learned that King Halrix never trusted anyone, not his court, not his generals, not even his own brother, who ran the vaults. He also discovered that the king's empire wasn't as secure as it looked. While the capital gleamed, the outer towns suffered. Taxes broke the backs of farmers, miners revolted in silence, and small-time thieves were executed in public squares just to maintain the illusion of order. Nooker knew this kingdom wouldn't fall from the inside like the others. No, Sarakar needed a spectacle, a collapse so dramatic that it would destroy the very symbol Halrix built his rule on: his gold. So Nooker crafted the illusion. In secret, he began forging currency. Not with counterfeiting, but with engineering. He developed coins of lightweight alloy, covered with a dusting of crushed golden powder that could pass casual inspection. To the naked eye, they looked identical. He didn't flood the market. No, he was smarter than that. He planted just enough into the hands of key merchants, tax collectors, and smugglers. Then he waited. Within weeks, whispers spread. Coins were being rejected in certain towns. A noblewoman claimed her vault had been tampered with. A blacksmith received payment for swords in coins that melted at low heat. Nooker played both sides. As Valen, he visited nobles and warned of coin corruption sweeping neighboring lands. "You must check your gold," he urged them. "Some say it's a message that someone plans to bring Sarakar's vaults to their knees." Panic grew. King Halrix ordered an emergency audit. Vaults were opened. Coins were tested. Hundreds of thousands were real, but dozens were fake. That was enough. Accusations flew. The king's brother was imprisoned for neglect. Several guards were executed for suspected theft. Merchants who had unknowingly circulated fake coins were branded traitors. But the real chaos was still to come. Because Nooker had done more than forge coins. He had infiltrated the vault system. Using blueprints stolen from a disrespected old engineer, whom Nooker had quietly befriended and paid in warmth, food, and conversation, he learned of an underground aqueduct system that passed directly beneath the main treasury. There, over the course of nights, Nooker constructed a siphon trap. It wasn't built to steal the gold. It was built to move it. With pulleys, rotating belts, and cleverly disguised tunnels, he began removing coins from the king's deepest vault and transferring them to a fake vault he'd built in an abandoned wine cellar below a nearby monastery. But he left the original vault nearly full. Then, on the day the king invited his lords for a public demonstration of Sarakar's wealth, meant to silence the rumors, Nooker made his move. While Halrix stood before the vault, boasting of eternal prosperity, Nooker triggered a simple mechanism, a pressure release inside the vault's floor that slowly tilted an inner platform. As the crowd looked on, a deep rumble echoed, and coins began to vanish, slipping through the floor cracks like falling stars. The people screamed, "What sorcery is this? Your gold is cursed." Halrix's hands trembled as he reached for the falling coins, helpless. And then came the final blow. All across the capital, forged messages appeared overnight, on doors, in wells, even carved into ice walls. The kingdom built on gold shall vanish as quickly as greed allows. The Shadow King is watching. The people didn't know what that meant. But they knew their wealth was no longer safe. Banks were stormed. Nobles hid their treasures. Traders fled the city. And in the heart of the chaos, King Halrix locked himself in the treasury, surrounded by walls that no longer held trust, only cold silence. By the time he ordered an investigation, Nooker was gone. Sarakar didn't collapse immediately, but its economy did. With trust shattered, the flow of gold slowed. Revolts in the outer towns rose with fury. The king tried to recover his grip through fear, but it was too late. His value, like his coins, had become hollow. And from a distant village, Nooker watched as another crown crumbled. He had brought down 3 kingdoms. One through pride. One through belief. One through wealth. Now, he turned south, to a war-hardened land ruled by swords and glory. But what they didn't know was that Nooker's sharpest weapon was neither blade nor fire. It was knowledge. And the 4th kingdom was about to bleed without a single wound. The southern lands were unlike any other. Here, the kingdom of Draven held its ground not with faith or gold, but with the sword. Towering warriors in armor marched through the streets. Gladiator pits echoed with roars of bloodthirsty crowds. King Kale, a warlord turned monarch, ruled with an iron fist and a blade always within arm's reach. He believed in one law, strength. And under him, the people learned to either obey or fall. Nooker knew this final kingdom would not be swayed by illusion or doubt. Kale didn't believe in gods. He laughed at prophecies. And he saw wealth as a tool, not a purpose. To take Draven, Nooker needed a different kind of weapon. Division. He arrived as a war strategist named Merrick, a wanderer claiming to have studied battle across dozens of fallen kingdoms. With weathered armor, scars made from ink and clay, and maps of ancient war formations, he caught the attention of Draven's high commanders. And eventually, King Kale himself. Kale was not an idiot. He recognized Marek's insights instantly, how he mapped weaknesses in defense lines just by watching a single drill, or how he proposed defensive mechanisms that saved Draven's eastern front from raiders within days. He made no promises. He took no coin. He simply gave results. But behind Marek's silence lay the mind of Nooker, who was studying not the kingdom's enemies, but its foundation. He discovered that the heart of Kale's kingdom wasn't just his army. It was the Brotherhood of Steel, a council of 7 generals who had helped him seize the throne years ago. Each commanded a different region, and though loyal, they all dreamed of ruling. Nooker began planting seeds. He forged letters, staged intercepted messages, arranged for two generals to be ambushed by rival soldiers, a setup he orchestrated using mercenaries disguised in armor from another region. He made sure one general escaped while the other was delayed, just long enough to look suspicious. Then he struck the most delicate blow. He created a fake declaration of divide, allegedly penned by one of the generals, calling for a rebellion to split Draven into separate provinces, each led by a warlord. Nooker delivered it to the king anonymously. Kale exploded in fury. Meetings turned into interrogations. Paranoia spread like fire through the barracks. Loyalty was questioned. Brothers became watchers. Even old allies now exchanged glances filled with suspicion. The kingdom of steel had begun to rust from within. But Nooker wasn't finished. He began spreading a new idea, quietly at first, through taverns, soldiers, and whispers carried by trusted messengers. A kingdom of war breeds only war. But peace, guided by reason, can conquer all. People laughed at first. But when skirmishes increased, when farms were abandoned because soldiers kept being pulled into conflict, and when trade routes collapsed from fear, the words began to make sense. And when Nooker's alter ego Merrick vanished, the rumor grew that he had been executed by Kale for suggesting peace. It wasn't true, of course, but it sparked something dangerous. Revolt. It began with soldiers laying down their swords in protest. Then came the civilians, marching through the capital with painted hands, chanting for unity instead of conquest. And finally, the Brotherhood of Steel cracked. Two generals turned on Kale, claiming he had betrayed their original vision. One tried to assassinate him. The other took half the southern forces and marched away. Kale still fought back. He was a lion in a storm, defiant and fearless. But a lion standing alone. Nooker had turned his kingdom of warriors into a battleground of ideas, one where brute force no longer held power. In the end, Kale disappeared. Some say he was poisoned by his own cook. Others believe he fled into the mountains with nothing but his blade. Draven didn't fall into ruin. It evolved. The generals were stripped of their power. A council was formed, advised by a mysterious strategist whose letters were delivered in black wax and signed only with a single symbol, Nabla. That was Nooker's mark. With Kale gone, the last of the 5 kingdoms had fallen. Each one had believed it was unbreakable. Each one had collapsed, without a single war led by Nooker, without a single castle stormed. He hadn't raised armies. He had moved minds. And now, from a mountain peak overlooking the lands that once belonged to 5 kings, the 22-year-old Mastermind stood in silence. He was no longer a boy from a forgotten corner of the world. No longer a wandering shadow. He was now the unseen hand behind every throne. A single ruler. A king with no crown, no blade, and no need for either. The Shadow King. And as the wind carried dust across the valleys below, he whispered to himself, not a boast, but a promise. Power isn't taken. It's redirected. One thought at a time.